Hello, everyone. This is Martin Comtois, MC Starman from beautiful Duncan on Vancouver Island. I'm joined today with my friend Ian Campbell from also from the island, but he who is now living in. Well, I'll let you introduce yourself, Ian.
Yes, so Martin and I know each other from my time in Duncan on the island. And as of early January this year, I relocated to Vilnius, Lithuania. So in the Baltics in Europe. And that's where I am now, and on a lovely spring evening, cloudy spring evening. And I'm glad to be here talking with you again. It's been a long time.
Yes, yes. So Ian is a Waldorf teacher. He was Waldorf teacher here at the school here on the island, Sunrise,
Mm-hmm.
and then now you're teaching in Vilnius. How does
Mm-hmm.
that? How is the school there, and how is your new position?
It's been an interesting change. I in Duncan I was teaching woodwork and crafts and things to uh, grade 1 to 8 kids, and over here now I'm only teaching 2 classes, but I'm teaching English for the first time. So it's been a big adjustment, but it's been quite fun so far. And it's been interesting to see how much see what the Waldorf movement over here is like compared to in Canada. There's in the city Vilnius, which is pretty small by Canadian standards. There's 3 schools already, and I think Waldorf is a little bit newer here in this country, but it's growing really fast. So I'm teaching at a school that is quite new. It's only in its 6th year, but it's growing more and more every year. So it feels kind of cool to be involved on like more of a ground floor level, building things as they grow.
So to introduce our viewers, we got to know each other when I was doing my workshop series pre-COVID
Hmm.
in Duncan, and we had some beautiful discussions on Steiner, Jung, and astrology, and then so I thought that this would be a really fun kind of discussion, but also kind of a socio-political, economic kind of discussion in terms of what life feels like in Lithuania and what it feels like in Eastern Europe right now with the
Hmm.
war and tie that up with our discussions that we were having pre-COVID. I think that would be a quite fun, huh?
Hmm.
And so when we were discussing the coming crisis, because that was the subject of many of the workshops and the discussions we had in terms of the astrology of our
Yeah.
times.
Yeah.
How do you feel, from a kind of a, 2/3 of the globes over, how does the people of Lithuania, and how do you feel the people and the crisis, and how is it going over there?
Well, it's probably so much to explain the whole thing. I mean, I kind of have a view of it through the whole pandemic as well. I managed to get over here in 2020, and I came back again in 2021. So I've kind of seen it through the whole everything that's happened so far. And yeah, I mean, it's with lockdowns, with everything that happened in that sense, it's very similar to Canada. The social tensions. Well, the social tensions here were actually even more intense in terms of this, vaccinated, unvaccinated thing. That was a huge contention in this country.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah, much more so than Canada. Uh, but that sort of thing seems to manifest in different ways in Europe in terms of I don't know. I always felt like the attitude here was um, a little bit less neurotic than in North America in terms of COVID and things. People were worried about, things, but they were still getting on with life fairly normally and finding ways to make things work in ways that they wanted to. So, the reason that I came here in 2020 was because there was still a music festival going on that I was invited to play at. I play music, folk music, and I decided, I don't really want to live in a world where I can't play music to people. So
Right.
I tried everything I tried everything I could to get here in 2020, and I had 1 week where it was possible to fly here, so I did, and it was a beautiful experience. And it was the only concert that I played of that year. Um, and then going forward, it seems like when I moved here, when I moved here, it was January of this year, and just a month after I got here, the truckers' protest in Canada kicked off, and it was very strange experience for me to be over here looking back at that from far away and thinking, just where did this come from? I didn't expect anything like that to be happening. And, I was watching the whole thing unfold day to day, and it was very, a mix of emotions up and down constantly, seemingly. And then as soon as that started to die down, one day I wake up to the news of Russian missiles hitting Kiev, and then having to start to deal with everything that's brought. And of course, I think that has been the most intense experience that I've been part of here yet. And it's hit, you know, the psyches of my friends here and people that I care about. I see it hit them a lot deeper than the pandemic has.
I would imagine that this would be, well, especially with the history of the place,
Hmm.
huh? And the Soviet bloc and the whole history of all the different wars
Hmm.
and World War II and all of that. You get the real feel, that, and you mentioned that, being, the Western, neurosis, the first world neurosis, we've never really gone through that many crises,
Hmm.
we're familiar to some crisis, but compared to the old countries there, these the wars that they've gone through are much more significant than anything we've ever been through here
Uh,
in our
and
lives.
they're so much closer, they're we've never had experiences of foreign tanks driving through our streets of our cities. I think when
Right.
it gets to that level, you're talking about a much more traumatic sort of thing. And people here in Lithuania, the Soviets were very, very brutal to the Lithuanian people. The Lithuanian people were quite resistant to the Soviets after World War II when they took over. And there was a partisan war here that lasted for about 10 years after the World War II ended. And during that time, this was Stalin's reign, and he was, you know, very brutally killing and exiling anyone who had any kind of dissent, or just their family members too. So
Wow.
during those days, I think it was 2/3 of the population, or 1/3 of the population was either killed or exiled or left to flee to other countries.
Wow.
And when you talk to people here, everybody has a story of one of their relatives getting sent to Siberia, and doing 10 years in a gulag and these sorts of things. And when you express, as a Canadian, I'm here, and I express this like shock to them of, wow, that's so amazing. What a harrowing story. And they're just like, yeah, yeah, that's what everybody's got, those stories. It's not even special to them. So it's very it's really in them.
So how do they live then, this war, this, how is this affecting life in Lithuania, and then what is it doing to people's psyche?
Well, It's been interesting. The first few days, there was definitely sort of an air of panic in the city, and people didn't know, especially when they heard that Russian troops were moving into Ukraine through Belarus, and you know, Vilnius is actually very close to the Belarus border on the other side of where they were coming through, but still, um, no one really knew what's going on. Is it going to be us next in a couple of days? And yeah, I was riding the bus that morning. Um, I was riding the bus that morning where the when the attacks were starting to happen, and I just thought it was very important that I pay really close attention and just see what this is like and what's going on for people. And the thing I noticed was young people were all glued to their phones on the bus, and the old people were all they were sitting very pensively, but they had this look in their eye that I never really seen before. And those older people remember the USSR. They remember what Lithuanians had to do to declare themselves independent, and how that cost many lives and a lot of suffering. And I would imagine they were thinking of all the things that they've been through in those years, trying to build their country, in a more free way, and
Hmm.
then thinking about the possibility that that could be taken from them again. So a pretty intense feeling. And I saw people lining up at ATMs and taking as much cash out as they could until the bank machines were empty. And there was this rumor going around the city that, oh, don't try and get cash because every ATM is empty, because people were thinking that they might have to run at any point. And even I put together a bag of supplies just in case, and sort of talked to my friends that had cars and said, well, okay, if things go down, what are we doing? But things, after a couple of days, that calmed down. And even on that first day, the other thing that happened, apart from just people being nervous, was the other part of it was extreme shows of support for the Ukrainians, because the Lithuanians really see the Ukrainians as like their brothers, and they have, even before now. And there were just thousands of people out in the streets of the old town here. I was seeing pictures of it, and these, the streets are packed with people, so, from one curb to the other, walking down the street. And they were having rallies of support. People started having fundraiser things almost immediately. Um, even parents from my school, they were collecting, and they would just drive over through Poland and cross the border and go to Lviv, which was, still a relatively safe city at that time, and take supplies and all kinds of things. And the Lithuanians really took on the like spirit of like, okay, this is our war, because I think they feel like this kinship with the Ukrainians, but also the feeling of, well, if Ukraine just falls quickly, then we may be the next ones.
Wow. Wow. And it's interesting you were mentioning, that would be a real cure to a neurosis, huh? So all of a
Mm.
sudden people don't become, or do you find that people are more neurotic, or there's a kind of a, okay, survival, it's a real thing, the instinctual nature takes over, and one what does it do to people spiritually to be in such a state of tension?
Yeah, I think it's really dependent on the person, because I think there's some people that that's been kind of paralyzing for, in a way.
Mm.
But then there's also people that like take it up and like, oh, this is my moment to help. And you see this real sort of heroism come out at the same time. So yeah, it's hard to say. I think it's unique for each one of us.
And as COVID just completely receded in the background, or are they still freaking out about that too?
No, basically it has, yeah. All the mandates are They were gone, I think, before that even happened. A couple weeks before. We need to wear masks in the bus now, but that's the last place, and I think that's going to be gone in like another week. So
Hmm.
yeah.
And what's the narrative in terms of the COVID crisis now? Do they people feel that that was an overreaction? How do they feel about it? They don't really care. They talk about the war instead, and much more important for them, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. I think everyone just wants to move past that, no matter what opinion they had during the time. At least that's the sense I get, and that's how I feel about it too.
That's kind of how it is over here too,
Mhm.
like, let's move on. But
Yeah.
the government's still really holding on. It's kind of interesting to witness. But um, so and so so you're a musician and you've been playing music and you've started a new band. How's that been going? So just socially, the interaction with your bandmates and with the venues and like that, or is life moving on as normal, or how is it going?
Yeah, I mean that's one of the things that was such a relief of coming over here was the feeling of normalcy in social situations. Um, People here, even back in January, February, people are going to bars, people are making plans, people are making music. I'm really happy to. It's such a musical culture too, and I feel very lucky to be. I'm playing music most days, either with my students, by myself, or with these new bandmates. And I started learning a new instrument, which you could actually see. It's that's That's a
Okay.
traditional Lithuanian instrument called a kankles, and I've been learning that.
Wow.
And I'm actually hoping to learn to build one. So part of the reason that I moved here was to kind of study these folk traditions, which are still quite alive in the culture here. And I'm hoping to learn how to build one of those. I've been just this morning, actually, I interviewed a woman who plays that instrument quite well, and I'm starting to try and like document my journey here. And I might be doing some kind of a podcast where I interview interesting people and
What?
yeah, try and get some of this magical stuff out more into the ether, because there's a lot of rich cultural and spiritual things going on here that people back home might never hear of.
Wow, that's cool. That's cool. What a beautiful learning experience. And so maybe we can shift our conversation a little bit more, and then we should talk some astrology too. But
Hmm.
in terms of Rudolf Steiner and how his teaching are being accepted, anthroposophy and like that,
Hmm.
what is the you were explaining how um, the teachers in the new school, they're really still quite unfamiliar with Steiner's teaching. They just so what draws them and what is the appeal in in a place like where you are?
Hmm. That's an interesting question. I mean, I don't know that I could speak to what draws other people. I really only know what draws me, but I mean, I could maybe have some conjecture about it. But Uh, it's interesting. I was drawn to the esoteric part of anthroposophy first before I was drawn to Waldorf pedagogy, but I think that's not the common experience. I think most Waldorf teachers hear about the teaching style first, and there's something about that that appeals to them. And then they learn later about sort of the system that these ideas came out of. So, if people don't know that much about Waldorf pedagogy, it's you're kind of teaching out of the idea of the child as a spiritual being who's growing in certain ways and has a certain schema of child development that Steiner observed in children that he had taught when he was younger. Um, and the curriculum is sort of based on this schema, and it tries to match where they are in their growth. And it's the idea is that it promotes a more holistic way of teaching a child. So teaching through, everything, through, how do I say, through rhythm, through the body, through the mind, through artistic activities. We're doing all of it instead of just, memorizing facts and
Right,
the
right.
kinds of thing that I did in public school.
Well, what do I mean, you're fairly new to the country and like that, and to the school, but what draws the teacher and what draws the students? Why is the movement growing so much and three schools in a small city,
Hmm.
that's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I don't know that I can answer that fully because, you know, I'm not completely familiar with all the nuances of Lithuanian society and education and things like that, but I do know that it seems that private schools here are a little bit more of a common thing. Uh, or maybe I shouldn't say private schools. I more mean alternative schools. Um, I think there are some fairly well-known problems in public education here, which makes parents a little bit wary, possibly, and also this. It's actually, it could be related a bit to economic growth in this country because Lithuania is actually uh, growing quite quickly, and there's a lot of I think with that growth there comes a lot of how do I say, people interested in new, different ways of doing things. It's a bit of a um, there's a bit of a sense of uh, how do I explain,
Opportunity.
opportunity and the willingness to try new ideas, towards the future in many different ways, and a lot of times in ways that maybe I wouldn't agree with. Most of the money here and the growth is all tech related, and you know I have my own opinions about that, but that's a funny coincidence too that you'll hear about in the Waldorf world, is that a lot of the children of sort of tech entrepreneurs, the parents will send them to Waldorf schools where they're not allowed to use any of the technology that their parents are developing. So
That that's very interesting, isn't it? That's
yeah.
very interesting. It seems to speak to because also here on the island, and I think I can only speak from the island perspective, but it seems like there's a huge push towards building, and creating new alternative schools. There's quite a few sprouting up.
Mm,
I've been spending some time in the Comox Valley, and there's quite a few there too, that are just sprouting up and just trying to get some traction. Uh, and there seems to be an overall dissatisfaction with the scientific materialism style of education that was
mm,
pushed upon, and it seems to be also kind of related to the crisis that we're going through, this collective psychosis. It really shows, you know at least a portion of the population is realizing that we really are susceptible to psychic infection,
mm,
and so in my work we've talked about, and I did a series on the undiscovered self, which is an essay that Jung did on the collective psychosis and kind of his predictions on that. What how did Steiner see this kind of this kind of, what do you hear in that, in that perspective?
well, he was sort of known to characterize these kind of things as, what he would call spiritual beings. So these sorts of things like a collective psychosis or an archetype, things like that in Jung's language, he would probably describe it like it was a living thing. however, you kind of have to, it's an interesting mental exercise, because you have to imagine, like, what would a being be that didn't have a physical body? It's kind of a trip to imagine such a thing. But um he spoke a lot about how these beings can that they sort of have their own aims, that they're working through humans to achieve those things, and certain ones have certain tendencies that they tend to bring out in humans, and in the earth and in the cosmos, because we're talking about cosmic beings too, not just something that exists on the earth, but more something that exists through everything that we could possibly perceive. Um, and Where do I go from there? That's a
Well,
big
no,
topic.
that's beautiful. So so this possession by the by what the Greeks would have called a daimon,
Right.
and you mentioned in our pre-discussion there about the essay Wotan, where
Mm,
Jung talked about Wotan rising up from the unconscious and possessing the German people during World War II and leading to World War II.
mm-hmm,
And the berserkers, the going crazy with blood and vengeance, and how Wotan rose up from the unconscious, and he talks about Nietzsche and talks about Goethe and talks about the German psyche and the European psyche in that essay. So it's not really that far from what Steiner would have said then in terms of possession.
yeah, I you can certainly see it like that. um hmm,
Interesting
mm,
stuff, huh? To see how susceptible we are to possession, even though and I think that that's what the value of these types of education is to re-educate the spirit. And it seems like in terms of the crisis that we've been going through, as you know, before the crisis, the COVID, we had this workshop series that we did in Duncan, and we talked about the crisis, how it had been building, and how it had been present with us for so long, and it seemed like it was interesting how we were talking about things really getting bad in the winter, and we were talking about the Saturn Pluto conjunction,
mm.
and then boom, it kind of hit us. And then ever since that, it's like it's really hard to deny the fact that we're in crisis, and it is a deep, deep spiritual crisis, and we need to have tools to resist this possession. So
Yeah.
what did Steiner say about that, or how do you feel that that's why these kind of movements are growing?
Well, the way that I think I understand it personally is, Jung's language around the unconscious, around this topic, is quite useful, because I think the place where these kind of harmful entities, or whatever you'd like to characterize them as, the place that they do the most damage is when you're not conscious of their actions on you. And a lot of the issues can be solved by just casting that light on what these things are, understanding them, and then it's pretty intuitive to know how to resist these forces if you want to. But first, you need to even be able to recognize that they're there. You
Mm-hmm.
know, they do a lot of their work in the dark, so to speak.
Well, if one thing that's become obvious because of this crisis that we went through, and then especially with the war there, is that these forces are still very much at play, and we need to be mindful of them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And do you find that in the these kind of discussions you're having with just your new friends? And you mentioned that you knew some people that knew some about astrology, and so what is the discussions among the peers that you're experiencing?
Yeah, I think people are just more and more open to these sorts of conversations than they ever have been before. And as you know, especially people of my generation, I'm a millennial, I guess you say, and even more, sometimes more so, people that are younger than me. But there's a lot of people now that have been coming up through these turbulent years, and it's fairly obvious to everybody that something's rotten in the state of Denmark, to quote Shakespeare. And to still be denying that is it's to have your head in the sand pretty deeply, I would say. Um, so the idea that you're going to get out of a bad situation by using the same thinking that got you into that situation in the first place, maybe it's becoming more obvious to more people that that's not exactly going to work. So
Mhm.
an openness to different thinking, and entertaining strange and radical ideas, I think it's becoming more common. And for me personally, it's just fun. I like to be challenged. I like to use my imagination. I like to hear about outlandish ideas and then just see what sticks for me and what might actually be a benefit to my life, instead of having this wall up of constant critique to like block out anything that you don't makes you uncomfortable in any way.
Well, it's one of my favorite things about my relationship with you and my friendship with you is that you have a quite a lively intellect, and we usually go quite deep in our conversations, and I know as you being part of the workshop series in Duncan, you always brought the interpacifical perspective to kind of counterbalance, the Jungian perspective that I offer. So
Hmm.
that's really rich and fun to be able to. And it's interesting. We've been discussing. I've been going doing. I started doing workshops again, and now I go to the Soul Center, and
Hmm.
so there's a much more of an interpacifical presence there. Mm, Nicolette came to my last lecture and kind of contributed, and so it's interesting how Jung and Steiner lived very very close to each other, and they had similar effects on the collective. um and it's interesting that I know from my own readings, Jung had a lot of resistance towards Steiner. I don't know if Steiner had a lot of resistance toward Jung.
Yeah, he did actually. He mentions him in a few lectures, and he kind of gives a bit of a critique of what, he's I think he's fairly fair, he says here's the things that I agree with about psychoanalysis, and here's some things that I find an issue with. But I find that interesting too, these two sort of like giants of the Western spiritual tradition. They're like a few, maybe a dozen kilometers away from each other, and I don't think they ever met in person either, which is almost unbelievable. But I don't know if that's true. Maybe they did. I'm under the impression that they didn't, but if anyone knows, they can correct me.
Well, I'm under the impression from my studies also, and again, Jung was fair but also critical.
Hmm.
And then I was thinking about, why would two people that are so close in terms of philosophically,
Hmm.
in what they saw, why would they have such a resistance to each other? And I'm reminded of a little, I don't know how to call it, but in India they have an aphorism or an anecdote where about wearing bracelets, so bangles, if you wear many bangles, they clash with each other and it makes a lot
Hmm.
of noise. But if you only have one, then it doesn't make any noise. So that's why sages live alone, because they
Ah,
don't like
yes.
to clash with each other. and
Hmm.
and and then the clashing with each other is actually a method of kind of asserting yourself. and by that assertion of yourself and the other, it's kind of an essential thing that we have to have. We have to be, if we are going to be convinced about our ideas, we have to feel that we have to test them against someone else.
Absolutely.
And we'll use the closer that person is to us, the more we'll have to feel like we are different than them. Just to, I don't know, it's a human nature kind of thing, but I think that we, one way or the other, we owe those two great men a lot in our evolution. And it seems that kind of because they spoke us of so many of the same things, like Jung's interest in Gnostic philosophy, and Steiner's interest in Gnosticism, is both of their interest in alchemy.
Alchemy, yes, absolutely.
They're so close to each other.
I'm kind of the opinion, in spiritual matters that, we're all looking at the same thing, and we're all trying to get to the same sort of source of, divinity, oneness, God. And, to have these big examples, even though they might clash with each other on certain issues, there's it's really valuable to have these perspectives that you can look at different things from. And I think it's just very it's such a gift. It's just important to not get stuck too much on one of them, and like for me, I resonate with a lot of Steiner, but Steiner is not immune to critique as well, and there's other authors and thinkers and things like that that I would respect just as much. And I'm sure it's the same for you and Jung.
Well, and then we can also look at the whole theosophical movement,
Hmm.
and Steiner was part of that, and then he went on his own.
Hmm.
And then if we think about it, theosophy, anthroposophy, psychoanalysis, if anywhere on that spectrum there, it seems like what animates our psychology and our spirituality is a combination of all of these things. Our
Mm.
modern psychology, the new spirituality, is informed from these movements in a profound
Hmm.
way. And to be, and it's come to the point where all of these ideas have merged into a new spirituality.
Yeah, I think, and you can trace, this modern New Age ism. I mean, that all goes back to these sorts of streams, and it just kind of branches off as the years go on into myriad other things that, might not have as strong a tradition. But if you're interested in sort of the history of ideas, which I consider myself to be, I love tracing these little threads back to where they come from, And
Right.
yeah, a lot of it, the end of that thread is Madame Blavatsky, really, for a lot of
Absolutely.
things.
Absolutely, Blavatsky is a giant in that, huh? And yeah, but also it's interesting, huh? The influence that Nietzsche had too,
Mm.
and also Goethe. I know those influences are really important um, to. It's so fascinating, and like, I think you have the right attitude, and I'm trying to emulate that same attitude too, of trying to become, of to see these undercurrents of thoughts, instead of seeing them as many paths, to see
Mm.
them as one emerging path that we are being encouraged to redefine. And understanding these people's work, these great men's work, is really important in us, to and really, if you look at the tree, I mean, it's not, so you got theosophy, you got anthroposophy, you got the analytical psychology movement, the Freudian psychology movement, and then and from that you got, you got the Krishnamurti,
Hmm.
and then if you think of all of that body of work and what's going on in terms of modern, new age kind of philosophy, they all take their roots in that work.
Hmm.
Really, a
Hmm.
lot of what's out there now in terms of current work from any writer tends to be rehashed theosophy, anthroposophy mixed in with a little Jungian and a little Freud. It's
Yeah,
kind of
it gets pretty confusing too because it seems like, I find it very important to for me to sort of know where all these threads go, but some of these authors now, it's so removed from the source that it seems like people don't even know where these things come from. And that's something that really concerns me, actually. And hopefully I can do some work, at some point to try and foster some education about history of these kind of things. That's something I'd really love to do. I've been thinking about getting into lecturing on this topic. I could just talk forever about these kind of things. So,
well, that's so rich, because and then it's fun because I have the same conclusions. It,
mhm.
it, you know, in being a mystic in this day and age, and to be really deeply rooted in studies, and to try to be a writer in these times, and to actually um, contribute something of lasting value, and then to compare yourself with these writers that are super super successful but whose message is kind of curtailed to be kind of attractive to the masses,
Yeah,
and
the
really
diluted is the word that comes to mind for me with a lot of that stuff.
diluted and commercialized.
Mm,
It's sensationalized. Spirituality is sensationalized. It's commercialized. It has to look good on screen, and then, but when it comes down to it, it doesn't have any depth, and there's
mm,
no acknowledgement of the teachers that came before them, which they're rehashing their ideas, but they're not giving them credit.
mm.
Like even you read the Jungians, and the Jungians don't even read Jung anymore. It's like, oh, and I don't know, how do you feel in anthroposophy? Do you feel that's the same thing, or
Well, actually, they have a different issue, which is they're too stuck on Steiner, you know, for the most part. And there are some really, really great works that come after his death from certain people, but the state of that society at the time was very, they were clashing with each other a lot for sort of like power over the, where the movement was going to go next, and a lot of it just it really fizzled out sort of in the mid 19 or what am I trying to say? The mid 1900s. Um, but there's some there's some really great works. There's some interesting authors now, but so much of that stuff is based on Steiner and only Steiner, and yeah,
Hmm.
it's another big topic to get into. Um,
I
but I
don't know
feel
what.
like it needs to be a little bit more embodied in these. I try to make it a part of my life and not just try to quote what Steiner had to say about certain things,
Right.
which is that's a cliche about anthroposophists. There's a good joke that I heard. How many anthroposophists does it take to screw in a light bulb? And the answer is we can never know. Rudolf Steiner never left any indication for us.
Oh well. Um, oh wow, there's a same one in psychological, but I forgot it. How many? Yeah, but that's a good one. Huh? We don't know. Simon never said anything about
Yeah.
it. Oh wow. It's interesting. It brings for me. I spent 10 years of my life in the Hare Krishna temple.
Mm.
Being submersed. Which really theosophy and anthroposophy are kind of an adaptation of Eastern philosophy into Christianity and a mix of
Mm-hmm.
the two, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so then, having spent 10 years in the Hare Krishna monastery, and the same thing happened with Prabhupada's teachings, when Prabhupada left, everybody started fighting.
Mm.
And then when I started, I got Prabhupada's books back. I got the Srimad Bhagavatam back here, where I started to study again. And I guess that comes back to, and we really haven't talked about astrology much, but I think in a sense, we've been talking about astrology all along, although we look at it more in terms of a philosophical change that's brewing. I
Mm-hmm.
think that it's mirrored also in the astrology of our times, especially with this Jupiter Neptune conjunction going on. There's really an awakening need to redefine what we see as spirituality.
Mm.
And that because of the internet revolution and the Uranus Neptune conjunction, of which you have in your own chart, that Uranus Neptune conjunction was really a very, very significant time. I've been doing a video series called the Astrology of the Great Reset, where I talk about these planetary alignments and how they've been brewing over time, and what we're going through right now, and trying to understand what's ahead. And it's fascinating how the astrology mirrors exactly what we're talking about, and that there is kind of a, and Jung talked about it in terms of um, of um, of the age of Aquarius, and then the Krishnas, they talked about Kali Yuga and then the golden age. And did
Mm-hmm.
the Steiners speak of a golden age too?
Yes, he had his own idea of. He actually, in his cosmology, he talked about the Kali Yuga ending actually in the year 1900. So he says that we've been in the sort of throes of the changing of the cycle ever since then. Which I'm not too sure about that one myself. I've read many authors talking about the Kali Yuga, and many of them are convinced that we're sort of dead in the middle of it now. Steiner thought it was over. But there's more to that with Steiner too, because to understand what he's saying with that, you have to kind of understand that he saw evolution as well. This is hard to explain exactly, but there's basically, in his view, there's some kind of evolution of mankind. There's also a de-evolution that's going on at the same time.
Right.
So as we were evolving physically, we started from the low point physically at a spiritual height, and as we evolve physically, we are actually losing our spiritual capacity over time. So there's this kind of opposites thing going on. So when you kind of contemplate that and then think about the turning of the cycles, that kind of makes a little bit more sense to me. But it's all these ideas I think are very porous. I don't think when he said the Kali Yuga ended in 1900 he means now we're in a golden age exactly now. It's nothing like that, right? It's kind of the same with astrology, right? You don't see these effects at exactly 12:01 on a certain day. It's a more free interpretation kind of way of seeing reality.
If we look at it symbolically and kind of try to see, this tendency that the human soul has to try to make a sense of time, and in Hinduism and the Kali Yuga and this procession of ages, it's a very, very developed technology, well, symbology or mythology that really clear, and defines this movement of ages, and probably in the more, it's probably the most well defined you know, um, uh, uh, I'm trying to find the word there, well-defined cosmology, it is much more complex than anything we've come up with in the West in terms of the Kali Yuga, the Dwapara Yuga, the Satya
Mm,
Yuga, the Treta Yuga, and the changes of 1,000 ages. And, that cosmology is like, it gives a huge picture. And then you have other systems which to give anthroposophy and Steiner its due right, he brings a lot of different mythologies into his educational system to
mm-hmm.
really educate people to all of these concepts of time. And yet you have a sense that a lot of the puzzle has still, they provided a lot of pieces, and all of these things, all of these teachings provide a lot of pieces. And it seems to be the opportunity and the challenge of our time is to take all of these pieces and to bring it out into, because the technological era has brought us all so close together, because here we are, just having a conversation, 10,000 miles away from each other,
Mm-hmm.
in real time, which really in other ages would have been done telepathically. But here we are able to video it and share it on YouTube for somebody in China to watch it, or well, probably not, but but somewhere where there's no censorship of that kind of material. And so it seems like we're having to redefine. And it is Richard Tarnas. Are you familiar with Richard Tarnas's work?
No, I'm not actually.
You would really enjoy Cosmos and Psyche.
Mm,
Cosmos and Psyche is the most important book of astrology of our generation. It is, he maps out 3,000 years of history according to outer planetary cycles,
mm,
with tremendous research into the events that took place, both culturally, creatively, politically, economically, over the last 3,000 years, mapped out according to planetary alignments, which makes it, which provides astrology with a scientific,
mm.
it's a book that took him 30 years to write.
Yeah,
Um,
that sounds great. I
Oh yeah,
definitely
the
will have to look
Cosmos
at
and
that.
Psyche is a must. And a lot of the work that I do with my table and in my workshops is all based on the studies from that. And you can just, I've read it 3 times and you keep reading and over. It's and also philosophically, but he talks about the Copernican revolution as being this one movement in the human experience where, looking at the system, and even nowadays astrology is still a geocentric system. What would it do to astrology if we actually represented the zodiac from a from a heliocentric
Mm,
system? That would be
mm-hmm,
much different, right?
mm-hmm,
But we are on Earth, and
mm-hmm.
the system works, so in a sense, moving from geocentricity to heliocentricity, we became unhinged philosophically.
Mm-hmm.
He talks about
We're
how
divorced from our real life experience for the first time.
exactly. And
Yeah,
then
it's almost the birth of abstraction in that scientific sense.
well, that also was the time where the Reformation and Christianity broke into, and everything, and then and then engendered the scientific revolution, and so we're taking a lot, and then that's when alchemy was thriving too, and there was there was an amazing transformation going on in the human soul, and we
Mm-hmm.
really haven't really stop spinning from that, in terms of, we're like spinning in a great universe,
Mm-hmm.
and how does it make it all sense? And the more we advance scientifically, the more confused and neurotic we're becoming, and that's really interesting, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
How does that sit with you?
Well, it makes me think of, at that time I think was the time where we really split from, scientific inquiry, which included the human experience in its ideas, and it included ideas of the spiritual and the cosmos and this sort of thing. And what we see is the splitting off of those two things, and we have, the birth of scientific materialism, which is the stream that we're all ensconced in now. And then, in my opinion, that the thing that broke off from that, you can follow that thread, which is that becomes the thread of all the occultists of those few
Hmm.
hundred years leading up until, you know uh, until probably the early 1900s, where people start trying to reconcile it again. And that might be we might be on a sort of a curve like this, where maybe they're starting to come back towards each other, but I'm not sure. I think they're both quite still far apart now, but it seems like, well, from what I've heard, people, when they talk about quantum mechanics and things like this, it seems to be laying waste to a complete materialist interpretation of the universe. So I'm hoping that we can do some work in our lives that maybe moves us back towards a more, togetherness of those two things,
Well,
because that
that's
could be it could be the solution for a lot of our ills nowadays.
this has been such a fascinating conversation as it has been unfolding. Huh? Are you familiar with Jung's work on synchronicity?
Just the maybe sort of the cultural cliche of what the synchronicity is, but I haven't gone deep into that aspect before.
Well, there's a book out there, and I want to really try to get a hold of it. It's a Wolfgang Pauli and Jung on synchronicity, and Wolfgang Pauli was a quantum physicist, Nobel Prize winning
Ah, okay.
quantum physicist, and they worked together. And
Oh,
so,
wow.
Wolfgang Pauli presents the quantum physics perspective to
Mm,
synchronicity, while Jung presents, and when Jung builds the case of synchronicity, he uses astrology and the I Ching as kind of proof of the work of synchronicity, and that's where Jung's ideas, where he starts borrowing also, or not borrowing, but integrating Eastern philosophy, especially Buddhism. Jung was really thought highly of Buddhism, called Christianity and Buddhism kind of really similar, in that it's the cult of the God man,
mm,
and so in Jung's studies of spirituality and then synchronicity, without that, to me, synchronicity is Jung's most important contribution.
mm,
It's become a word that is integrated into our conversations, as
mm.
much as introvert and extrovert,
Right.
and but synchronicity is a scientific concept of how quantum physics kind of, it's the meeting of spirituality and and science, to and then it actually gives a scientific basis to what I do as an astrologer. and
Mm,
and and, and so that's, my whole life resides on that principle of synchronicity, and that that discussion with Wolfgang Pauli and quantum physics, and how quantum physics kind of supports those kind of ideas. That's fascinating stuff.
Mm-hmm. Sounds great.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. How did you like this one?
I loved it. I think that was a great conversation. Um,
Uh-huh.
I'm always I like how, this seems to be something that comes up in conversations that I have, but start from this kind of your personal experience, and by the end of the conversation we're talking about the whole cosmos and all of human history, and I love these kind of things.
Far out, dude. So how, for those who are watching us, how do people follow your music, and how do they, get connected with you?
Yeah, sure. Well, I put out albums under the name Crooked Mouth. So you can find me on Bandcamp. I have all of my stuff on Bandcamp. I'm on Instagram, Crooked Mouth Folk, and I'm on Facebook, and I'm on Patreon as well under Crooked Mouth Folk. And I'm trying to sort of garner some support for my mission here of documenting the crafts and things that I've learned here. And like I said, I've been starting to do some interviews myself, which are going to be up there. So if you're interested in folk music, paganism, these kind of things, you might like to check it out. And I'll have some stuff up there for free too for people to see. So I can send you links and things like that, Martin. And yeah.
Yeah, if you in the comment section of this video, if you posted some contact information, this was fascinating. And then for those of you who are tuning in because of your sharing, my astrology is the healer and a dreamer astrology. I use the Jungian psychology, dream analysis, and astrology to help people, support them in their kind of making sense of what the spirit of our times is like. And so that's, and then I have this MC Starman kind of show where I have different people, more and more varied like this, of interviews and discussions on the spirit of our times. And so please do follow us. We grow by you supporting us through liking our the drill. You like, you subscribe, you comment, you share. Those things make us grow. And these kind of cross pollinations, where we can come together, in community and just have beautiful discussions like that, really valuable. And so thanks for joining me, Ian.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me. And please say hi to everyone in Duncan for me.
I'm gonna promote this in Duncan. They're gonna really enjoy it. I know Diana and the crew. Everybody will be thrilled to see you. And I don't know if you're into it, but we can let a few weeks go by and then do another one if you like.
Yeah, let's see. It sounds great. I'd love to.
Sounds good, or whatever. All right, we're out of here. Whoop whoop whoop. Ian Campbell and Martin Comtois. Boom.